Why does redemption in 2026 look like a presidential pardon followed by a primetime costume change, black and white prison stripes, a wink to the camera, and Jailhouse Rock, like federal prison was just a quirky character arc? Todd and Julie Chrisley were convicted of bank fraud and tax evasion, then pardoned by President Donald Trump in May 2025, only to pop up on The Masked Singer soon after, performing Elvis in outfits critics read as straight-up prison cosplay. They were unmasked as the Croissants, and the joke basically wrote itself. What's the point of consequences if you can remix them into a comeback single? Stay till the end, because once you see how reality TV launders scandal into branding, you'll never hear the word redemption the same way again. Todd and Julie Chrisley weren't obscure criminals who quietly disappeared into a courtroom docket. They were reality TV famous, stars of Chrisley Knows Best, selling a glossy, Christian-adjacent, luxury family brand that functioned like a weekly commercial for "We're rich, we're righteous, and we're definitely better at life than you." Then, in 2022, federal prosecutors said the shine was built on fraud. The couple was convicted of conspiring to defraud banks and of tax-related offenses, with reporting summarizing the case as bank fraud and tax evasion. They were sentenced to prison time, Todd to 12 years, Julie to 7 years, per widely reported coverage, and the story shifted from aspirational reality family to reality family but make it federal. Now, zoom in on the surface-level moment that makes this topic feel like it was engineered in a lab for satire. In May 2025, President Donald Trump pardoned Todd and Julie Chrisley. And instead of a long, quiet period of laying low, no interviews, no soft-toned "we're focusing on family," the comeback energy arrived fast. Todd Chrisley soon appeared on The Masked Singer and performed Jailhouse Rock, while dressed in a striped prison look, a choice described in coverage as part of a croissant's reveal that leaned into the incarceration imagery. Reality TV didn't just accept the scandal, it decorated it, then set it to music. The vibe is cinematic in the darkest way, a studio stage with glitter lights, a costume that's supposed to be cute, a song literally titled Jailhouse Rock, an audience clapping along as if prison is just another theme week, like 80s Night or movie soundtracks, and the internet reaction becomes predictable. Memes, think pieces, outrage, and that eerie laughter people do when something is too shameless to process normally. This is the surface story. They're back. They're joking about it. America loves a comeback. But the subtext is uglier, because the joke only lands if you accept the premise that incarceration was never the point. Content was. And that's the outer shell we're looking at. A legal case that became a brand crisis, a pardon that became a reset button, and a performance that turned the idea of prison into a costume gag. The Chrisley myth was never just a reality show family. It was a carefully staged morality play where money was treated like proof of character. The brand sold a very specific fantasy, a sharp-tongued patriarch who tells it like it is, a picture-perfect wife, well-dressed kids, big houses, bigger confidence, and an atmosphere where every argument felt like it ended in a lesson. Even the chaos had a polished edge, like the family could scream at each other in designer clothes and still come out looking closer than ever. That's the trick. When you package dysfunction as entertainment, you can rebrand control as charisma and call it family values. And the show's public image wasn't accidental. It leaned into a kind of southern luxury cartoon where judgment is the love language and appearances are the religion. If something looked expensive, it was automatically virtuous. If something sounded confident, it was automatically true. The myth didn't require you to believe the details. It only required you to believe the vibe. That this family was successful because they deserved it, and that anyone who doubted them was just jealous, bitter, or too negative to understand their hustle. That's why the scandal to redemption pipeline fits them so perfectly. Reality TV trains audiences to treat character arcs as a substitute for accountability. You don't need facts, you need a storyline. The public relations version of their story writes itself. Misunderstood outsiders, targeted by a system, surviving hardship, returning stronger, protecting the kids, keeping faith, and fighting for the truth. The details can be vague because the emotions are familiar. It's the same script every time. First, deny, then reframe, then suffer publicly, then come back. If you can get to the comeback fast enough, the audience will start remembering the suffering more vividly than the wrongdoing. And here's where the sarcasm lands. Redemption doesn't have to be earned if it can be performed. A photo op becomes healing. A carefully worded statement becomes growth. Silence becomes class. A joke becomes strength. The myth survives by treating optics like evidence. Even the outrage helps, because outrage is still attention, and attention is the currency that reality TV knows how to cash. This is what makes the Jailhouse Rock moment so chillingly on brand, not because it's clever, but because it reveals the entire logic. If prison can be turned into a costume, then consequences can be turned into content. If consequences are content, then the only real goal is to control the edit. And if you control the edit, you can sell anything as transformation, no matter how unfinished the truth actually is. The first crack in the redemption paint job is that the Chrisleys story isn't a vague, misunderstood miscommunication scandal. It's a federal case with a paper trail. The U.S. Department of Justice described the convictions as including conspiracy to commit bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit tax evasion, with Julie also convicted of obstruction of justice, and the sentencing followed in November 2022. People's recap of the case frames it plainly. Guilty verdicts in 2022, prison in January 2023, and a combined sentence measured in years. Not a slap on the wrist, not a misunderstanding, but a serious financial crimes conviction that the public watched turn into a reality TV cautionary tale. So when a comeback arrives, the tension isn't can they sing, it's what are we being asked to forget? Because there's a difference between rebuilding a life and rebuilding a brand, and reality TV has never been great at telling those apart. But wait, here's where it gets more unsettling. The comeback didn't have to be earned through time, reflection, or restitution. It came with the most powerful editing tool in America, a presidential pardon. That pardon is the hinge that makes everything else possible. Associated Press reported that President Donald Trump pardoned Todd and Julie Chrisley in May 2025, 3 years after their convictions for bank fraud and tax evasion, clearing the legal obstacles in a way only one signature can. And if you want the purest proof that modern celebrity consequences are optional if the narrative is managed aggressively enough, look at the timeline. May 2025, a full pardon. January 2026, a glittery stage and a joke you can sing. That's not we paid our debt, that's we received a reset. And once a reset exists, the PR logic flips. You no longer have to persuade people you changed, you only have to persuade them the story has moved on. But wait, because the way you persuade the public to move on is rarely with seriousness. It's with humor, with spectacle, with a performance that dares you to object because objection itself keeps the spotlight warm. Which brings us to the part that feels like the writer's room got drunk on irony. The song choice. In January 2026, coverage described Todd and Julie Chrisley appearing on The Masked Singer as the Croissants, performing Elvis Presley's Jailhouse Rock, while wearing black and white striped costumes that many viewers read as prison uniform cosplay. Entertainment Weekly's reporting makes the moment even more revealing. It describes Julie being conflicted about performing Jailhouse Rock because of the obvious connotation, while Todd was more eager, meaning the wink wasn't accidental. It was debated, then chosen. And the backlash wasn't subtle either. Page 6 reported that the appearance sparked criticism on social media, with viewers calling it mocking their incarceration precisely because the performance treated prison like a theme, not a consequence. This is the real motive structure in action. Scandal becomes an aesthetic, punishment becomes a prop, and self-awareness becomes a shield. If you joke about it first, you can frame critics as humorless. If you frame critics as humorless, you don't have to answer the harder questions. But wait, here's the nastier twist. The performance doesn't just sell "we survived," it sells "we're entertaining again," which is the only currency reality TV reliably respects. And the business logic is right there in the interviews and coverage that followed. Entertainment Weekly reported that their participation was suggested by their publicist, and that the couple was already talking about multiple upcoming projects. A return to television, including reality and lifestyle concepts, meaning the performance wasn't just a spontaneous fun moment. It functioned like a re-entry point, a proof-of-life broadcast for the rebrand. Decider also framed the unmasking as part of a season 14 premiere moment that leaned into their recent past, while highlighting that the couple is planning additional TV ventures, an almost perfect example of how scandal gets converted into a relaunch strategy. And this is where the satire lands hardest. Jailhouse Rock isn't a song choice, it's a positioning statement. It says this chapter is now safe to laugh about. It says the arc has progressed. It says you're allowed to clap. But what happens when the culture starts clapping on cue every time the camera tells it to? What happens when a pardon becomes the ultimate plot device, and the next step is not accountability but merchandise-grade reinvention? Because the real scandal isn't that reality TV is shameless. Reality TV has always been shameless. That's why it works. The scandal is the speed and smoothness with which consequences can be turned into content once the legal barrier is removed. 1 month you're a defendant, the next you're a costume. 1 year you're sentenced, the next you're a punchline. And the audience is being trained again to accept that the difference between wrongdoing and redemption is mostly production value. So here's the question that should sting a little. If redemption can be performed in stripes under stage lights, what exactly are consequences for justice or just an intermission before the next season drops? The Chrisleys' pardon to primetime arc only feels surreal if we pretend celebrity culture is still governed by shame. It isn't. It's governed by attention economics, where the worst thing that can happen to a public figure isn't wrongdoing, it's irrelevance. A federal conviction is catastrophic in a courtroom, but in the content economy, it can become a storyline upgrade, higher stakes, sharper conflict, a ready-made villain, the system, and a built-in comeback season once the legal chapter closes. That's why a presidential pardon doesn't just erase time, it rewrites meaning. It turns punishment from consequence into character development, and it teaches audiences, again, that power can convert accountability into narrative.
Reality TV is the perfect delivery system for that lesson because it doesn't sell truth, it sells arcs. Viewers are trained to interpret everything: wealth, downfall, prison, redemption as plot beats, not ethical events. The Masked Singer appearance weaponizes that training. By staging Jailhouse Rock as a glittery punchline, it invites people to process incarceration as entertainment, not as the end point of serious fraud convictions. The joke works only if the audience accepts that consequences are temporary and remixable. If you can laugh at prison stripes on a stage, you can be nudged toward treating the underlying harm as old news.
And this bleeds into a larger cultural problem. Accountability becomes a performance that can be bought, managed, or politically granted. A pardon is legal power, but the cultural effect is emotional permission, a signal that it's socially acceptable to move on, to clap, to call it a mistake instead of a pattern. Meanwhile, the public gets trained into a strange kind of complicity. Outrage becomes engagement, engagement becomes profit, profit funds the next rebrand. The system doesn't require forgiveness, it requires attention. So the uncomfortable question isn't, can people change? It's, what happens to a society when consequences can be edited into content and redemption is just the next format? In the end, the Chrisley comeback doesn't just test whether people believe in redemption. It tests whether redemption still means anything when it arrives through a pardon and a punchline. A federal case with real convictions and real sentences gets turned into a stage bit. Striped costumes, Elvis, applause, like prison was a temporary aesthetic and not a consequence. And once you can convert incarceration into entertainment, you've essentially proven the strongest rule of the attention economy. Nothing is too serious to monetize if you can make it meme-shaped. So here's the question that lingers after the music stops. When reality TV turns a pardon into a relaunch, are we watching accountability Or are we watching the most shameless rebrand in modern pop culture? Because if the arc goes conviction, pardon, prime time, then consequences aren't consequences. They're just an intermission. And the final punchline writes itself. If Jailhouse Rock is your post-pardon anthem, maybe the real mask isn't on the show. It's on the culture that keeps clapping as long as the comeback is catchy.